Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
All right, so why don't we kick it off with metabolism here? So today, Derek, we have our frequent guest. I mean, she's been on several times, right, Dr. G? Dr.
Yeah.
Gabrielle Lyon?
Yeah.
And Derek right now is sitting in front of a Starbucks, and it just took us about 10 minutes to realize that he wasn't really sitting in front of a Starbucks, just joking.
I would have a mask on. Right?
Yeah, no one has a mask on, which is why we know it is fake. That's how we knew. He's trying to fool us. But Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is a brilliant functional medicine doctor, life coach. I mean, she kind of does it all type of thing. I mean, and I threw life coach in there, even though she's not really, that's not what she does, but she brings a very interesting element to the table. That's something that I've never really seen a medical practitioner do. So Dr. G, how are you?
I'm great.
Awesome. And I'm excited. We're going to cover a topic today that Derek and I hear very loosely thrown around, and that's the metabolism.
Yeah.
Okay,
I just did a post. It says, WTF is metabolism. Because, it's probably the most popular word. And you hear, whether it's fast or slow, but what actually is it?
What is it? Yeah, explain that to us right now. Let's just get an understanding on what the metabolism is first.
Yeah, metabolism refers to all chemical processes in the body, but the purpose of metabolism can be broken down into two specific things. Number one, ATP generation, and number two, the building of structures, muscle cells, tissues, mitochondria. So really, for all intents and purposes, what we think of when we think of metabolism is ATP from food, energy from food, or energy from exercise, and building structures.
ATP.
Yeah.
Adenosine triphosphate, correct?
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Can you explain that function to people?
So really, ATP is our energy source. And when we think about ATP in terms of nutrition, we often think of carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. But really, when you think about ATP, you can think about ways in which you can increase the utilization of energy sources. So increase the utilization of calories. One way that you can do that is by increasing protein consumption, because protein consumption is a very expensive energy process, meaning it takes more energy, number one, to break down. We've heard of the thermogenic effect of protein, right? And number two, the other aspect is to just process it. It takes energy. Protein is so important for building. So 100%. Essentially, you utilize protein to build lean tissue. Lean muscle mass in itself, the process of building, pushes metabolism. And the actual end product of muscle mass also pushes metabolism.
So, getting into, and you dropped a couple words there that I don't think most of our viewers are familiar with: thermogenic effect of protein.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get so far off
right.
course here, but I think it's important for them to understand what you meant by that.
So let's think about it. Let's think about calories, and let's think about the macronutrients. So we've got carbohydrates, and that's 4 grams. For every 1 gram of carbohydrates, it's 4 calories. Mm-hmm. For every 1 gram of protein, right, it's 4 calories. Oh. For every 1 gram of fat, it's 9 calories. Yeah. When you compare protein and carbohydrates, you go, well, they're probably utilized by the body the same, and they take the same amount of energy to be metabolized. But actually, the structure is different. So protein has nitrogen. Nitrogen has to be excreted. So the process in which protein is utilized is actually more expensive to the body. The body has to take a lot more effort to get rid of that and dispose of that nitrogen.
Eric, how old are you now?
I don't know. I'm just not smart enough to really follow that.
You just had a dead straight face there.
Yeah,
listen, I think that we can really simplify that. Really the concept of metabolism is really about ATP generation, which is energy, and building new tissues.
Right.
The best way to make a faster metabolism is to do one or two of those things.
Now, when you discuss thermogenics, like I know in like, say, the bodybuilding culture, people would take things to get a thermogenic effect to like get more ripped and all that. So even something like they were taking like clenbuterol back in the day, right? Can you discuss that?
You mean yesterday?
Yesterday.
Well, yeah.
So that's
isn't that an asthma medication?
Yes, it's a beta 2 agonist. I believe it's a beta 2 agonist, and it causes a vasodilation of the lungs, and because of its impact on the receptors. And I don't actually know the mechanism of action. Sorry.
It's okay.
And I don't necessarily know the mechanism of action, but it has increased the energy capacity of the body where people get lean.
Right.
Not particularly safe. You know, there is this tolerance that builds. It affects the heart. But there are other ways, unnatural ways to push thermogenesis for sure. Increasing body temperature.
Derek, you're in your 50s now, right? So you've
no way.
I'm turning 51. Yeah.
50, yeah. So Derek's in phenomenal shape, and obviously he's an avid runner, and he trains, and his kids are exceptional athletes, and he's been kind of passing the torch over to them, which is great to see. But you know, into your 50s, I mean, I'm 43 now. Have you noticed a difference between 43 and 53 in reference to your metabolism and how you're processing food?
It's been interesting because, and maybe both of you can comment on this, but there's two things happening. One is you gain weight, you gain abdominal fat as a man as you get older, right? But the other thing is I was training less intense and I was training less regular because, you know, you have kids and you're doing this and, you know, you're trying to operate your business and everything. So now that COVID has struck, I'm training regularly. I'm working more intensely because I'm lifting and running with my kids. And guess what? I'm looking way better and I'm feeling way better. So I haven't really figured that out. It certainly is tougher, like to get that response in terms of like leaning up and all that, but it's still possible.
Totally.
It's just mentally you have to wrap your brain around it and go like, okay, I got to really focus and I've got to really hunker down here and do this. And it's going to take maybe, now it's been like 3 months. I've noticed a huge difference, but maybe it used to be like 3 or 4 weeks. So that's the interesting part now.
Yeah, but Dr. G, I mean, how much of that do you think falls on to people just giving up as they get older?
So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and seeing this in clinical practice. And it's really interesting. What Derek is saying is absolutely true. So a man and a woman, they're different as it relates to hormones. And men, I don't believe that you have to gain weight. For the men that I know, for what I have seen, if you continue to train, like Don, I expect you to look better in 10 years than you do now, if that's possible.
I thank you.
You guys,
I'm hoping.
We're going to get that in writing.
Yeah,
I want that in writing.
It really comes down to being able to maintain your muscle tissue.
Right.
If you are sleeping, your testosterone remains high. If your diet is tight, you're able to maintain your hormonal status. But it really comes down to training. For women, around perimenopause, when estrogen drops, there is a change in glucose metabolism. So the amount of carbohydrates that they can eat, they're much more likely to store. You know, are there randomized controlled trials that show this? Not that I've seen, but, you know, women gain weight. It's like this universe. It's one of the biggest groups of obesity and sarcopenia, destruction of muscle tissue, is perimenopausal women. So they have to train and they have to adjust their diet.
You know, talking about the metabolism, and I think the way everyone, you know, refers to the metabolism is how, you know, I think they're really trying to say how they're processing food and how they're storing body fat. And, you know, if someone, you know, you hear this all the time, is sitting down for the last 4 months due to COVID and not working. And, you know, you'll always hear, well, my metabolism slowed down. Right. I mean, what's your response to that? Is it your metabolism? Can your metabolism slow down when you hear about all these taboo diets or pulling meals away or putting yourself into a caloric deficit? Mm-hmm. Does your metabolism slow down? It
can. It actually absolutely can, to adjust for less food.
Right.
And if you're putting your body under a tremendous amount of stress, the thyroid, there's certain thyroid hormones that increase, not the metabolically active, but a component of thyroid called reverse T3 actually can increase and block the receptors. So in essence, it's one of the things that I look for in athletes all the time is their reverse T3. their metabolism slows down, typically from a caloric deficit, typically from stress.
Derek, I think we see, I mean, I don't know, you have good eating habits, right?
For the most part, I would say so. Like, we don't go out to eat at all. Like, obviously now we don't, but we didn't really. So I think we control what we give ourselves and the ingredients and all, and that, and then just simple things like you said, like hydration, we're very careful about. So I just
breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? You consume breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah, and snack, and obviously if our activity levels go up, we eat a bit more. But I would say that I think when you're in shape and when you train, you become much more aware or sensitive to changes. So if you have something a little different, or you stray and you have too much sugar or caffeine or whatever, I just notice a really amplified effect, as opposed to maybe if I didn't train. Like, I don't know. You guys can comment on that.
Dr. G, I mean,
maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no. You were basically saying that if activity level drops, you're not as hungry. That's basically what you're trying to say.
Well, I just not as aware of the fact that maybe I'm taking too much of, like, say, too much sugar or too much caffeine. If I'm not training, I don't notice it as much. But if I'm training,
you're less motivated, right? I mean,
there's a mindset around it, certainly.
Yeah, I think that, we put in place promises to ourselves. And when we're really on top of things, we, at least from my experience, we do certain things. We're drinking our water, we're reading, we're meditating, whatever it is, we're executing our plan, and our diet is tight. As soon as you begin to fall off of any one of those promises that you've made to yourself, I think that other pieces creep in. So more sugar, or staying up late, you name it, but you begin to kind of chip away at that lifestyle is what I've seen.
What about when, I mean, I hear this comment all the time, I'm just, someone's starting a new diet, they're not hungry. I go away on vacation for a week and my meals, definitely get reduced from maybe it was 5 or 6 a day to maybe now 3 a day. And when I come back those first few days, it's tough getting that food down. But, what do you say to someone who's trying to, start on this whole health and wellness path and they're just not hungry early on?
So are you asking me, what do they do if they're not hungry? They don't really want to eat? Because I know you and I really talk a lot about the calorie deficit, and you believe that people are oftentimes under eating.
That's what I believe. But I also, it's tough to force on someone who's, I mean, how many clients have you met with in the past that are only getting in 2 meals a day and they're just under eating, and then they start trying to implement breakfast in, and breakfast is suddenly like, oh my God, I'm just not hungry in the morning. I just can't get food down. I'm just, I'm just not hungry. So like, what do you say to them? Do you explain to them what's going on with their metabolism? Is it that talk where, we got to pick things up a little bit? Like,
yeah, totally. The first thing that I always talk to patients about is they have to be able to execute even if they're not ready, or it's different and they're not uncomfortable, because if you wait for that moment of readiness, that might never come.
Right.
So, and there's really good research that shows by having 30 grams of protein in the morning really is kind of a starting place. It actually affects your ability to resist certain foods later on in the day. And it sets the stage for your metabolism. And glucose regulation, blood sugar control, which is what we care about, right? We want blood sugar control. We want sustained energy. It's really interesting. When people don't eat correctly and their macros are out of balance, there's an ebb and flow in blood sugar. That increases anxiety, because every time you get hypoglycemic, clinically, people often become, quote, shaky or irritable or anxious. And it's interesting. So when you think about the foundation of an individual's life, it has to start in nutrition.
100%. I mean, if my nutrition's off, I feel like everything's off. It's like, it's one thing to have a meal here and there, but like when you're truly out of your routine, I do find that brings anxiety for several reasons. It's not where I'm actually happy. Getting back into the thermogenic effect of things, because that obviously affects metabolism. If someone's asking you for thermogenics, because, naturally everyone wants to go there first before, getting to the root of the problem. Do you ever recommend anything, or are you just like, no, this is diet, caffeine obviously can help out? Like, what's your thought process?
So I definitely will push the envelope because the treatment has to match the severity of the illness. Mm-hmm. If an individual is obese for a long period of time and they've been suffering for a long period of time, then I will oftentimes implement something else to help push their ability to appetite regulate. I will push their ability to see change quickly, right? Because there's nothing more dangerous for an individual than to have extra visceral fat. It's totally toxic. Obesity is the cause of Alzheimer's disease, is one of the causes of Alzheimer's. Cardiovascular disease, hypertension, having this impaired metabolism and impaired muscle is the trajectory of aging is horrible. So going back to your question, will I use thermogenics? I will. So thermogenics can be unsafe. So I will use other drugs, absolutely. And I try to choose more natural ways. For example, metformin is from a plant. Metformin is something that improves insulin sensitivity. And there's a lot of controversy around it. But I actually have it compounded in very small doses. And just by utilizing that, and we use it temporarily, it actually improves inflammation, it improves your ability to use foods, improves insulin sensitivity. So that's just an example. Yes.
Cutting down on inflammation, does that help improve one's metabolism?
Totally.
Yeah.
Because muscle is an endocrine organ and its nemesis is really fat tissue. So when you have extra adiposity, it actually blunts the anti-inflammatory effect of muscle.
So what would be your starter guide for, Derek's coming to you right now and he's like, listen, I want to get my metabolism moving a little bit. Like, how do I optimize that? What are the things, how are you steering him in a direction as a client?
Two main things. One, dietary protein, because we know that protein is an expensive macronutrient for the body. Also, it's really lays the foundation for building tissue. And the next thing is exercise. And you and I were talking about this yesterday.
But not supplemental protein. You're saying like, make sure I'm doing that within my diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that you can get the majority of stuff from whole foods. You're a lean, fit guy. I don't need to put you on phentermine. You don't need that. Right. There has to be a safety valve in place where, we are doing just within the framework of what is going to optimize you without causing you any harm.
Has there been any research in reference to vegans or vegetarians when it comes down to their metabolism? Because you're saying one of the two major things is dietary protein, and what is the big challenge of a vegan or vegetarian is to get in a higher level of protein. Point. Yeah, I always wonder that.
That's actually a really, really good point. I don't know if there has been. Overall, the vegan vegetarians in the literature are typically smaller people, smaller bones, have less density in their bones, are more at risk for injury. That's a very interesting question as it relates to their metabolism. I don't know.
It's interesting.
That's interesting to think about.
It's we've been in this era right now where it's almost like, vegetarians against, animal based.
So weird.
It's just so crazy. But, the thing that's been consistent with thousands of people I work with online is most vegans and vegetarians, they have the same complaint when it comes down to body composition.
All of them. But think about it.
They are really struggling to get lean. I'm not saying it can't be done. And I'm not saying that there's an Olympic athlete out there or a world-class sprinter, Derek, or someone
very hard though.
Very difficult. And it's working against you in my opinion.
So listen, I have to say, I feel very passionately about this. And one of the reasons is because, I trained as a geriatrician. Part of my training was being at the bedside of, I've seen hundreds of dying individuals, and it's brutal, and when you see what happens to vegan vegetarians and those individuals with low muscle mass, and I'm not saying that just because you're vegan and vegetarian, you have low muscle mass, but man, these guys fall and break a hip. They don't come out of the hospital. The majority of individuals who could become injured are then put into nursing homes. And it's not just them, but the effect on the families. It is, if you haven't seen it, and I don't wish it on anyone, it destroys people's lives. And it affects all of the family members because every family wants to be able to take care of their own. And the amount of difficulty it goes into caring for an older adult who is frail and cannot function on their own is just not.
Very difficult.
So that's why we have to talk about the true science and have intellectual integrity about what some of the science shows. And we know that those that have a moderate protein diet do better in all respects, as it relates to lean muscle mass, as it relates to body composition, blood glucose regulation, lipid profiles. Those that have high quality muscle tissue have a better chance of survival, period.
Yeah. Sorry, Derek, go ahead, buddy.
I was just going to say, should we worry about the source of that protein, whether it be animal based versus plant based? Because obviously that came out,
Totally.
What sort of composition or what sort of mixture should we have?
And this is really the intersection between agenda and science when this comes out, and when individuals push plant-based proteins, it's not the same. And listen, these are hard, fast biological numbers, period. The sky is blue. The amino acid content of a steak is different than the amino acid content in the percentages than broccoli, period. That's not even, it amazes me that the discussion has become, oh, well, it's equal. It doesn't matter. It's the same. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a nutritionist the other day that I'm close with say that there was a specific protein powder that she was recommending, and it has, because it's from peas and rice, and it's the combination of those two profiles, that it is a complete protein.
Totally.
Okay, now, is that true or is that not true?
It is true. And that's one way you can get around animal-based proteins. But I want to tell you this, and this is something that concerns me, is pea has 1 million times more of an estrogenic effect than an animal-based protein. So now you're talking about, we have no long-term studies of what the kind of estrogen dosing in these pea blends are going to do. We have no idea.
Right.
It's just not the right thing to do.
It's funny because you get that argument of, well, I want you to stay away from whey. Whey, people are against whey because it's dairy, but I'm also finding, and Derek, I'm not sure if you've had experience with this, with taking different types of whey protein supplements, but not all whey protein is equal. And, even I've taken different grass-fed whey protein supplements and have had a completely different response to that whey. And there's so many other factors in there. Derek, do you take a whey protein?
I don't. I did in the past, but I'm trying to simplify things and just trying to get my diet in order. I think it's great
if you're not. Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. One thing that we've noticed is my daughter, she's 13 and she's growing and everything. She's very athletic, as she's developed sort of a lactose intolerance. So she gets a lot of, stomach irritation and all that. So now I'm wondering, what should I do with her in terms of making sure she gets what she needs?
My recommendation would be to switch her to whole foods.
Yeah.
I think that the rice pea blends are okay in some form, but I think we just don't know long-term. And then the question becomes what else you could do. And you could take a collagen protein and you could supplement the branch chains, and it is deficient in, tryptophan as well. Yeah. Right. In tryptophan, and then it's low in lysine. So you could add a collagen protein and then add some essential amino acids in that. That would be another alternative.
Yeah, that's actually a cool idea. And I don't see people leaning on BCAAs. I know this is a talk about metabolism, but this is all tied in pretty much, right?
It is all, yes.
Branch chain amino acids, isn't that something all vegans should be taking? And in taking that, shouldn't that help them improve their metabolism? I think that's why this is all tied in.
Yes, it does. Leucine is very important in metabolism because it generates that process of muscle protein synthesis. Right. And muscle protein synthesis in and of itself is a very taxing process on the body. Protein turnover requires a lot of energy.
Right.
And it doesn't really happen, through the pathway of leucine without the branch chains. So yes, all vegans and vegetarians should really be taking branch chains and essential amino acids if they want to be optimized.
What is the impact of all this craze of like fasting, intermittent fasting on metabolism, and should people be careful?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Really depends on the individual. If a woman is trying to get pregnant, fasting is not something that I'd recommend. If an individual is under tremendous stress, this is now not the time to throw in fasting. Fasting can be great if you're trying to control calories, and you're really dialed in, but you're trying to control calories. Or for example, you're a night shift worker. And it's really interesting with those guys, Just by staying up overnight, you can get a change in your blood glucose and insulin levels. And you can actually become essentially almost diabetic, even if you're eating the same thing, but now you're staying awake overnight. So
wow.
Fasting, yeah, it's really interesting. There's some good studies on that. So fasting can be absolutely utilized well. Do you guys fast?
I've dabbled, but then I just have no willpower. I'm just like, I got to eat. So
I'd say maybe once a month. I'll throw it in there if I know it's going to be, a morning where it might be for convenience purposes. I'll kind of kill two birds with one stone and say, all right, this is a morning where, I may have had a big day of eating the night before and just feel heavy and full, or, maybe something is going on that morning where it's going to be very inconvenient for me to get my meals in, but no more than once a month. Do I feel good from it? I feel fine from it. I mean, it's sometimes that fast actually, I feel like brings out a little bit more of my mental clarity.
Totally.
I know even recently, this might be a good question in reference to metabolism, but recently, like I said, I've been getting my calories up, and I woke up today and this morning for some reason, I was like, oh my God, I'm just going to go with a protein, fat, vegetable breakfast, which is like, woke up, I felt sluggish. I had that and I felt great. And then, I had a small little meal before the workout, and I went and I had a really good workout. I haven't really been hungry all day for some reason. It's just for some reason. And I can't ever really explain that. It's like, is it just a bad day? Is it that I'm sick of food? Is there something going on in my metabolism? I had a much different type of workout today than I've had in a very long time. But that was still going on this morning. And then all day today, I've been just kind of not that hungry. So is there anything, I mean, I couldn't imagine you had an answer on that, but is there anything that you can relate that to?
So first of all, your breakfast is interesting. So you chose two of the most satiating macronutrients, right? Mm-hmm. So we know that protein affects neurotransmitters, it affects, gut hormones. So you actually are less hungry which is one reason that protein is so important in maintaining weight. And then you had fat, so you've got two things that are going to keep blood sugar stable. So you're not having any swings. So really when people get hungry, oftentimes they're chasing blood sugar. 90 minutes after a meal, their carbohydrates are too high. They're getting this spike in insulin and then they're hungry.
Right.
But I will say that, oftentimes, and I've just seen this clinically, when an individual is training at a pretty high level, there's this weird transition that happens. And I have no data to support this, but there's this weird transition that happens, that hunger, when you're kind of sub-training, people are very hungry, right? Like they're almost sub-training. And then all of a sudden they kick it into a different kind of training. And it's like their appetite goes away. And I mean, I've seen that.
It's not the first time that this has happened. And, I was starting to think about, because as you and I discussed, the diet always changes.
Yeah.
And, I might be going, or someone might be going great on a diet for a specific period of time. And then out of nowhere, it's time to mix it up. And suddenly I felt like I was like, all right, am I starting to feel sluggish with too much carbohydrates in the morning? Is that gas tank almost overflowing? Is it overspilling?
Yeah.
with carbs, and do we maybe need to shift and try and maybe bump the carbs up post workout? Maybe that's something that might be better for body composition. Maybe try that for a while, and then guess what? Maybe 2-3 months, it's back to the old way because I'm going to start feeling like the tank's running on empty. That's what I feel like goes on with the human body and the metabolism when you're really kind of dialing things in. I feel like you get comfortable, you get into this routine that feels great, and then out of nowhere you're like, oh damn, like what's going on? This doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I think that's great to know. And I think that the body should become accustomed to doing a little bit of work. So for example, if you take out your carbs in the morning and you rely on proteins go through that process of gluconeogenesis, which is the creation of its own glucose. So your body actually generates all the glucose it needs. So instead of you actually having that carbohydrate breakfast where you're not making the body do any work, by switching it up, you are now stoking the fire and making your body go through its own metabolic process.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's funny because we were talking all metabolism the entire time, and our next topic was going to be carbohydrates, which we've almost started kind of flowing into, Derek. So I don't know if we should cut it and just, start with carbs, or we should just flow into it? What do you think?
I just wanted to say that I think one of the things that really has helped me, and maybe you guys can say, is I'm not traveling.
Yes.
Traveling just beats the hell out of me on every front. So because I'm not traveling, it's easier to kind of normalize these things and get into these consistent habits. Whereas when I travel, oh my goodness.
It's a good lesson for everybody. Maybe we've got it all wrong, the way that we're living our lives, It's interesting.
Yeah. Do I need to physically meet you and shake your hand, Don? I don't know.
Me? I don't think so. Honestly, I don't think so. I think you said it. I think there's so much spending. I think there's so much stress on people's lives. It's one thing to go take a trip here and there, and it's nice to network and get in front of people. But you hear some stories. I've had clients who've flown over to Korea for a day and they're back on the plane, literally that night without they haven't even checked into a hotel. And I'm like,
that's outrageous.
This is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like their hotel room was literally the airplane. So yeah, Derek, I mean, like if you look at yourself right now at 51, you thought your metabolism was slowing down. You thought things were getting worse. And then you've almost been reinvigorated, which I've been watching you and your kids go through all this. I mean, 51 years old, the guy's sprinting, he's running, he's training, he's dropping body fat. And why did that happen? He's still getting older. That's consistent, right? I mean, why did that happen? You're training more consistently. You're not traveling. You're not changing time zones. You're probably not waking up with an alarm clock. You're eating better quality foods. You really don't drink. It's like, duh. It's like, well, okay, well, that makes perfect sense. Maybe people start having to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I don't have to color my hair.
You really don't. It's pretty impressive. I haven't either yet, but I mean, you got a few years on me. I don't know.
Keep it going.
I love it. So.